Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Catherine Snyder. Welcome to CSL Boulder Valley and to our little Sunday morning online coffee and conversation. Today we have Rev Dan Granda speaking to us from Miami. But first, we are the Center for Spiritual Living Boulder Valley in Lafayette, Colorado. And Centers for Spiritual Living is an organization that teaches that each one of us is a divine being, that what we say and we think matters, and that you can change your life by changing what you think. And we start each one of these little talks with the type of prayer that we call affirmative prayer. It's not about beseeching to an outer divinity. It's about aligning our own inner divinity with truth principles. And this prayer is about inviting forward each one of our internal spirits. Each one has their own manifestation of that divine energy. And so as I pray, I invite you to invite your manifestation of divine energy, spirit, godness, whatever, however you relate to it, bring it forward. Right. So take a moment, take a breath, go inside. And take a moment to bring your consciousness to the fact that life is, that this thing that we call God is everywhere, filling everything in this beautiful spring morning, with its life, with its presence, with its power. And we are each blessed to be part of that, to know ourselves part of it, to know that light within, and to speak into that aliveness and bring forth from it. And so I speak a wonderful day for all of us, a time of inspiration here with Rev Dan, and just a knowingness of our divinity and knowing that all will be all right. And having said that, I release this into that void, into that spirit that always says yes. And so it is. All right. So, Rev Dan from Miami, Florida, a graduate of Holmes Institute and the School for Spiritual Leadership. He's a licensed minister with the Centers for Spiritual Living. He is co-founder and co-director of the Soul Evolution Collaborative, which is a Center for Spiritual Living teaching chapter, right, as are we, dedicated to fostering personal transformation, communal evolution through an innovative bricks and clicks model. It's his philosophy that better people make a better world. Amen to that. Rev Dan can regularly be heard speaking to this shift happening in our world, inviting individuals to embrace the responsibility we have to each other and the community around themselves. All right, Rev, let me spotlight you and then have you go. Okay.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's so cool to be here. I love being able to be online and speak at all these different communities around the world, really. Our ministry, Soul Evolution Collaborative, is primarily virtual. We are actually a teaching center, which is a new member affiliation type within Centers for Spiritual Living. Well, I say new. It's been around for 2 or 3 years already, but our community was the catalyst for that new community type because what we were doing, we launched during 2020, and there were several parameters of launching a new center that we couldn't do in 2020 because everything was virtual. So a lot of what you all are doing is very familiar. It feels very familiar being community online and meeting Sunday mornings on Zoom and all that. So it's exciting to be here. Thanks for inviting me. As I said, I really enjoy getting to be out in the world and meet people from all over the place who are doing the same thing that we're all doing. So I thought we would talk a little bit about authenticity today, because authenticity is actually one of the core values of Soul Evolution Collaborative. It's one of the things that we really held dear to our hearts when we launched, and so because of that, it comes up pretty much all the time, this idea of authenticity, trying to live an authentic life, where we all get to show up as who we feel we really are. And what's really interesting about that is it sounds like a beautiful idea, except the question comes up all the time. How do I know what my authentic self is? How do I know if I'm being authentic? And this actually just came up at one of our community conversations the other week again. It comes up often, but it came up again, and we were talking about desiring to live an authentic life, but then not necessarily knowing what is an authentic life. How do I know if I'm being authentic? What does that really mean? And what we found was there are some common misperceptions about authenticity that seem to come up fairly regularly. And what I think is there's kind of this trap in authenticity, that authenticity in spiritual communities somehow means that we are supposed to show up perfectly, and also we're supposed to be able to show up the same way everywhere, no matter where we are, that we're supposed to show up the same in all of these places, because that's authentic. If you know your authentic self, you're going to show up that way everywhere you go. And that is actually not true. And yet, well, wait a minute, but if we are our authentic self, wouldn't that be it? Wouldn't we be able to be that same person everywhere? If we're authentic, we know who we are. Wouldn't we be able to show up that way, that one way, that same way everywhere we go? And if that's not it, then what is it? What is authenticity? What is an authentic way of being? And if it changes, if it's not the same everywhere we show up in every scenario we're in, then what is it? How do we know? And pretty quickly it starts to get murky and cloudy, this idea of authenticity, because it sounds like on the surface like it should be this very simple thing. We're all striving for authenticity, to be who we really are, and yet maybe not that easy to figure out who we are, who we actually are, how to show up in that authentic way. So we have this question of what really is authenticity, but also we found that there's this question of why authenticity. Why does authenticity matter in general? Why does authenticity matter on our, quote, spiritual journey within our spiritual communities? Authenticity sounds like a very noble idea, and it comes up really frequently, being authentic. But why is it important? What impact does authenticity have on us as individuals, on our spiritual journey, within our communities, within and throughout the world, right? So in kind of studying authenticity for many years at this point, one of the things I have found is I think that in life in general, we are at this crossroads where, because of the way technology has evolved, so many people are connecting in so many ways for the first time. News, 20 years ago took a certain amount of time for it to reach all the different places, and now it's instant. We, just like we're doing right now, we can all jump on Zoom and have a Sunday service that is everywhere all at the same time, right? So we are all literally connecting in ways that we haven't really connected before on a large scale. And so what's happening is we're finding out that people live life in a lot of different ways that in the past we may have been completely ignorant to or oblivious of. Like, people in this community tend to live in a certain way, and people over there across the country or across the world maybe live very differently. And so we are at this crossroads where life is showing up in new ways pretty regularly for a whole lot of us, which is pretty cool. And it can also kind of be scary, because I think that it can almost feel threatening in a sense, because we're used to a really common way. We're used to the way that we grew up in, the community that we've been a part of, the way that we identify. We're used to what that feels like, what that looks like, how that shows up. And so when we find out that other people show up in other ways regularly, that life isn't just the way that we learned it was, then all of a sudden there's like that signal in our brain that goes off. That's like, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. This feels dangerous. Now, it's probably not actually dangerous that people live life differently than we're used to, or I live life differently than they're used to. But the way our brains work, we haven't yet evolved to the place where the different parts of our brain, the different layers of our brain, communicate well enough to recognize that someone's actions, while they feel threatening, someone's way of life, while it feels threatening, isn't actually life-threatening to us. So that reptilian brain doesn't really talk too well to the mammalian brain or the neo-mammalian brain, or our logical thinking centers. And so this whole authentic life idea shows up in a lot of different ways, and is showing up a lot more frequently in front of us, a lot more quickly, with experiences that we're all have a tendency to feel very new to. These things are very new to us and can feel threatening. And because of that, I think we're also finding that people are maybe not just going with the status quo as much anymore because that's the way it's always been, or that's the way we're used to, or that's the way we've done it. We're now being exposed to all these new ways, and so people are trying new ways and attempting new things. And turns out that perhaps there are systems in place within our lives that really don't work for most people. I think one of those systems we might find is, this is going to sound surprising, but war has been around forever, and it's just been how it is. And yet the more we are seeing it in real time, the more people are waking up to the idea that, like, wait a minute, this is actually never been okay. It's been accepted. Not that it's ever been acceptable, but it's been accepted. And I think more and more people are kind of putting their foot down to this idea, like, wait a minute, no way. That's not only not acceptable, but not accepted anymore. We're not just going to stand by and watch it happen. Other systems in place that are oppressing people is even just legislation. We have legislation throughout the country that is actively working against people being who they are. And so there are a lot of these things showing up in response to people trying to live an authentic life because it doesn't look like what we've always been used to. And so the conversation that we had the other week at Soul Evolution Collaborative, we have a weekly Thursday evening gathering, and we all kind of get together and just talk on a certain topic. And so authenticity was the topic that night. And again, that the question of how do I know if I'm being authentic came up. And I don't know why this memory came to me, but it did. So in this idea of what is authenticity and how do I know if I'm being authentic, I had this memory of being at a water park with my son, and he was 9 or 10 at the time. And it was really fascinating to watch him at this water park because, there were the tube slides, the lazy river, the wave pool, the high dive, all of these different water attractions at the water park. And he was a decent swimmer, but, being 9 or 10, you're maybe not tall enough to go on all the things, and barely tall enough to go on some of the things that maybe were designed for people who were, from his height all the way through adult height. And so it was fascinating to watch, to see what he would go on. And man, did he have all the guts in the world to go off that high dive at 9 years old. Well, we ended up going back to the water park the next year. Same water park, all the same attractions, wouldn't even go near the high dive. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, and we kind of talked about it, and he just wasn't interested in it. But it was interesting to see now that he was taller, a year taller, could go on things he couldn't go on last year, and some of the things he did the year before now didn't have interest in doing. And it was fascinating because, uh, like, to watch this kid who was fearless jump off the high dive now all of a sudden have no interest. Like, you had the time of your life last year doing that. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it struck me that I'm like, oh, that's authenticity. It wasn't that he was afraid of the high dive. He just didn't have any interest in doing it. And isn't authenticity just like this water park, just like this wave pool, where imagine you are at a water park and you are learning to swim. Now you're not brand new to swimming, but you're still kind of learning and getting used to it. You're going to show up differently to the lap pool than you are the tube slide, than you are the high dive, depending on your comfortability in on the slide or in the depth of the water or jumping from different heights. And yet your level of swimming ability is consistent. So if your authenticity is, I'm aware of how well I swim, and because of that awareness, I'm going to show up by choice differently to each one of these water attractions. I'm going to show up to the lazy river very comfortably because there's a tube. It's not that deep. You can just float around, hang out. It's easy. It's easy. Maybe the tube slides are easy because you're on this tube, you're going down the slide. It's a lot of fun. It's fast, and I'm cool with that. You get to the bottom, and even if you flip out of the tube, the water's only 3 or 4 feet deep, so you can just stand up. But if you're not that comfortable swimming and you go off, you're probably not going to go off the high dive. But if you go off the high dive, you're probably going to have a little bit of a challenging time coming up out of water that's 12 or 15 feet deep and then making it all the way over to the side of the pool. But the authenticity is, this is my level of swimming. And so it's not about showing up the same way in every scenario. It's not about showing up confident at every water attraction, at the wave pool, the high dive, the whatever. It's not about confident. It's not about showing up the same way. It's about showing up knowing who I am, knowing my level of I don't know, swimmability, right? My level of comfort swimming. If I am aware of that, then I get to show up in that awareness to each one of these attractions. And so I think that that's the same way that we can kind of walk through life. Is the more we know ourselves, the more we know our comforts, our discomforts, our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, the more we get to be at choice in any scenario. Because the alternative, and I think this is what we're seeing going back to life showing up in a lot of ways that seem new to a lot of us, is when everything seems the same, we can live by that default thinking, right? Those processes, those systems of thinking in our mind that just say, this is how it is, right? We learned it from our parents. They learned it from their parents, from their parents, from their parents, from school, from society. Wherever we learn, we got these messages, it kind of wrote these programmings in our mind. And that created a set of default thinking that when we aren't making a conscious choice, it usually chooses for us. And a lot of times it chooses how we react to things. In a certain scenario, if you tend to react the same way, someone cut you off in traffic and you tend to react the same way every time, we're probably not choosing that reaction. That's a default reaction based on history, perhaps generations of a way of thinking. And so again, with the water park thing, if I'm not aware of my level of swimming, young little kids want to go off the high dive all the time, having no idea. yeah, but you got to be able to swim. You get to the bottom. No one's gonna. I mean, somebody would probably jump in and get you, but that's not how this works, right? Like, you got to be able to swim your own way out. So the same kind of thing, that authenticity is less about what it looks like when we show up and more about the thought process that goes into how we show up. Am I choosing the way that I am reacting to the situation that I'm in? Right. And so, what is authenticity? What does authenticity actually look like? Well, there are some common signs. These may not be the only signs, but certainly ones to pay attention to. Inner alignment, right? Uh, do my thoughts and words and actions line up? So when I am in a situation, if I am choosing how I want to show up in this situation, do my actions reflect the thoughts and words, the programming that I have going on in my head? And is that how I want to show up? Because oftentimes there are ways, those instances where later on we can like beat ourselves up, like, oh, why did I say that, or how come I did that, or whatever. That's our default programming, right? I don't actually want to show up that way. And so our actions are not in alignment with our values, our thoughts, our words, our beliefs. And so there's an opportunity there to actually reassess and rewrite some of that programming, which is I think the coolest part about all this is that in desiring to live an authentic life, it is always going to move us forward towards living more of an authentic life, being more of who we want to be and show up how we want to show up, because it will certainly let us know, our mind will certainly let us know when we're not showing up in a way that we want to show up. So are my thoughts and words and actions all in alignment? Another sign of authentic living is emotional honesty. Do I feel like I can express my emotions, even just to myself, in a true and honest way, right? Are there parts of myself that I'm trying to ignore or repress or put aside? And oftentimes that shows up as anger, right? We don't want to, maybe we don't want to express sadness or grief or embarrassment, and it comes out as anger, right? Am I being my being in a way that I can name, and even if it is something we don't like and is uncomfortable, that's still authentic. Are we in a place where we feel like we can name what that is, honestly? And then another sign is courage, right? This courage to be vulnerable enough, again, even if it's just with yourself, and maybe it is with those feelings, right? Can we be vulnerable enough to name what the feeling is, and then say, oh yeah, that's right, I'm not trying to repress that, I'm just going to let that be? The willingness to have the courage to just let the feelings be what they are is a huge step in authentic living. And it's not happy all the time, right? I think, part of authenticity and showing up perfectly like we were supposed to, or at least that's the message that can easily get shared. If you're not happy, then don't show up, I think is the message that can, the surface level message that can get misunderstood, is if you're not perfectly put together and happy and content all the time, then that's not authentic, that's not spiritually authentic. Then you shouldn't show up that way, right? But in reality, it's more like, can I name what it is? Am I vulnerable enough? Am I courageous enough to say it to myself or to others, and then show up as that? I'm not gonna lie about it, or maybe like the water park, different scenarios, different people, different places, we will show up in a different way. But I know, right, if it's by choice, I know how I'm feeling, I know what my beliefs are, I know what my desire is. And I think that's it too, is that really only you know what that feeling is and how that works for you. And so the science of mind language that goes with all this, because Ernest Holmes didn't really talk much about authenticity. Authenticity, I think, is kind of a newer languaging. I mean, obviously the word has been around, but the idea of living an authentic life is a newer idea. And yet the concept was around, certainly in Holmes's writing. And this is really the science of mind ease for authenticity, is this idea of transformation. And I think when we realize this, then all of a sudden our perspective on authenticity can easily shift from that surface level, kind of misunderstood level of authenticity to authenticity can mean many things. And that is that Science of Mind is about transformation, right? We are transforming our lives. We're transforming the world. We're transforming our experience. And often, I think this gets also confused with transcendence. Like there's certain religious beliefs in the world that we're trying to transcend the human experience. Well, Science of Mind talks about the human experience is the spiritual experience, and the spiritual experience for us is the human experience. And so our purpose here to show up authentically is just to be here in this life. And so we get to decide what we want this life to look like. We have influence on how this life shows up, and it is through transformation of thought, transformation of experience, transformation of belief, that we get to influence how that life does show up. And so I guess to bring it back to the water park example again, we can transform over time. We can transform our ability to swim and our confidence to show up at any one of these different attractions within the water park. But we're also transforming how we are experiencing each one of those. So we do have to be aware of where we are in our journey, and we're not going to be equally comfortable at all the different places. And so in real life, we're not going to show up. We're probably not going to show up the same way at work or with family or with friends or wherever, whatever the situation is. There are probably going to be situations in our lives that we're not comfortable enough or safe enough to be as equally courageous and open about who we are. There are some people in our lives we're going to be way more comfortable with and way more safe with, and certainly have that ability to be much more open and authentically ourselves to those people. And so if you are looking for some ways of increasing your courage and your comfort to be authentically you, there are three fairly easy practices that you can take with you and use pretty much every day. And the first one is self-reflection and meditation, which is something that is kind of the answer to anything. Self-reflection, just kind of looking at your life with curiosity and being gentle. We don't need to beat ourselves up about past experiences, but self-reflection on how did that go? Did that experience go the way I wanted it to? Did I get to show up the way I wanted to? Did I say what I wanted? Did I do things I didn't want to do, didn't mean? How would I like to show up in that experience? And then certainly, meditation, we can bring those ideas into meditation practices with us. And even imagine what it would look like to play that situation out differently, right? A second thing is journaling and self-inquiry, right? We can sit and write out it. I know for me, it can be very helpful to write out my thoughts. My thoughts in my head are one thing. My thoughts on page are very different. And a lot of times it helps to put it on the page to really see in some sort of sequence what those thoughts are, and follow the logic through it, follow the feeling through it. What does that feel like? Does that make sense? Is that how I want to be? Can I choose something different if it's not? And then C, I think this might be the most challenging of the three options. The third option is embracing our imperfections, right? Cultivating this idea of self-compassion, because I think it's easy enough to reflect on our scenarios and let that old tape run that's like, oh, you dummy, why did you say that, right? But if we can reflect on the situation and objectively observe what we did or what we said or what happened, and have compassion for ourselves and go, yeah, I don't think I said the best thing, or I really wish I could have said something different. And then have compassion for ourselves. We're like, okay, well, next time I will try and do that differently if that situation comes up again. And often it's those situations that seem to play out over and over with different people, right? Can I choose to show up differently in that situation? And I think authenticity also kind of extends its grace to even when we're just trying to choose a different way. Maybe we haven't gotten to the point of actually showing up differently yet, but even setting the intention to show up differently, I think, is also part of this idea of authenticity. So as we navigate these various pools in this water park of life, I think we can remember that authenticity is not just about being the same in every situation, but it is about becoming more and more aware of really who we are, right? Who we are now, who we want to be in this world. I think it's about developing a habit of choosing how we want to show up as often as possible. Not that we're going to get it perfect or get it right. That's not the goal, but choosing, attempting, setting the intention, right? It is about willingness to try, and I think even the willingness to fail at it at times, right? But if we embrace this courage, if you embrace the courage to be yourself, to honor your unique journey and the work that brings you towards this transformation, that in doing this, we not only find this inner peace and fulfillment, but we also get to inspire others to do the same thing, right? We get to show up authentically, and even authentically in the process. I think that allows other people to see that and go, oh, I can do that. I can do that. So let's commit to living authentically, creating this like ripple effect of truth, of love, connection outwards in our community and also in the world. So this week, swim confidently, knowing that your authentic self is your greatest strength.
Hold on, unmute. There we go. There we go. Now I can say thank you very much. That was amazing.
Oh, thank
you.
Very good. I applaud.
Thank you. Cool.
Thank you. Yes, let's see. I loved what you said about how do I know if I'm being authentic? Why does authenticity matter? I'm going to stop the recording so that we can start discussing all these things.
Yeah. So I'll wait till you stop.
In a minute, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.